What's up everyone, I'm Eldridge, and it's that time again where we look at the patch and see what changed. First off, let's go over the new ships. The Midway class has been added as the American Tier 10 aircraft carrier. I won't talk about the aircraft carriers in this video because I already have another video in the works where I'm going to look a bit more in depth at all the changes that have befallen aircraft carriers and where I think they stand right now and all of that stuff. Next up, the Miyogi has quite drastically changed. It has received a new top hull that adds a kind of pagoda mast. And what that means is the Miyogi is now 1 knot faster, has a much better engine than it had before with 59,000 more horsepower, the surface detection range dropped by 500 meters, the gun range increased from 15.3 kilometers to 16.9 kilometers, and it now has AA guns which it didn't have before, dealing up to 108 DPS at 900 meters. But sadly the Miyogi still only has 6 guns, and it still only does just over half the DPS of the Wyoming and the Arkansas. I honestly think that wargaming is fixing in the wrong place. The problem with the Miyogi is that it's such a weak battleship. Not that it's weak against aircraft or too slow or doesn't turn fast enough, it's just not a good battleship. 6 guns isn't enough. 6 guns just doesn't work at tier 4 when there's 2 other battleships that have 12 guns each. And speaking of the closed beta test reward ship, the USS Arkansas, they put it on the test server for us to check out. And, well, honestly, there's not that much to say about it. It is pretty much a premium version of the Wyoming. There are a few differences here and there in engine power and turning circle and blah blah blah, but in the end it's still a premium Wyoming, and as such absolutely adequate for a tier 4 battleship. Next we have the Atago, Japanese premium cruiser at tier 8, which replaced the Kitakami. You have no idea how happy I am about this change. Whatever you think about its history or how cool it is as a concept, the Kitakami did not work the way they implemented it. It was weak, it didn't fill any role, and it was massively over-tiered. There was no way the Kitakami was ever going to be competitive. The Atago on the other hand is great. It's pretty much a Mogami with 203mm guns. It's a little bit less maneuverable than the Mogami and has slightly worse detectability, but all in all it seems to be in a really good place for a tier 8 cruiser. And I actually can't wait to get my hands on it in open beta. Next they phased out the tier 1 Japanese cruiser Katori and replaced it with the Hashidate. Now the good thing about the Hashidate is it's a little bit faster. I mean, it still only does 20 knots, but that's still faster than the Katori was. But the problem is that it only comes with 120mm guns as compared to the 140mm guns on the Katori. These guns also sit in really big paper turrets, which means they get destroyed quite a lot. It turns a lot better than the Katori, but all in all I do not enjoy the Hashidate. It has to measure up to the Erie and it just doesn't. The Katori at least had the 140mm guns and a lot of hit points. The Hashidate just doesn't have any of that. But it's cute, I suppose, and you don't have to play it that long anyway. Oh, and now I have some sad news. The Albany was removed. Yep. Now let's get on to the hidden stuff that didn't make it into the patch notes. But remember, this is not the final version of the patch, it's still on the test server, a lot of stuff can change, which is why I'm not going to make an undocumented changes video, I'm just going to go really quickly over the stuff that I've found. I just want everyone to be aware of it so we can talk about it and tell Wargaming that we don't want these changes or that we do want these changes, whichever the case. And I'm going to make an undocumented changes video as soon as the patch is final. Now firstly, all guns below 203mm had their high explosive maximum damage nerfed. Basically this affects all cruisers up to tier 5 or 6 and all the destroyers. Japanese destroyers across the board have lost 200 maximum HE damage on their ammunition, and US destroyers have lost 100 maximum damage across the board. Now it doesn't sound like a lot, but for the Japanese this is actually a reduction of 10%. For the US destroyers it's just 5%, and for the cruisers it's far less and practically irrelevant, but it is very significant for the destroyers, and let's face it, a closed beta World of Warships patch without a destroyer nerf? Where would we be? At the same time, all guns with caliber above 203mm had their HE damage increased. For Japanese battleships this comes to between a buff of 15 and 18% in maximum HE damage, and for the American battleships it comes out to about 8 to 12%. As an example, the Congo's HE damage went from 5,000 to 5,700. And this is across the board for all battleships, so battleship to battleship nothing has really changed, but it definitely skews the balance across the classes. Next up, all battleships now have to buy an engine upgrade, which adds to their overall module research cost. The Aurora and Murmansk both received a buff to their concealment, with the Aurora having both air and surface detectability increased, and the Murmansk having only its air detectability improved. The Kuma now have a catapult-launched plane on their top hull. This is especially important to you carrier and destroyer captains because it means there's also going to be a lot more planes in the air at lower tiers. And yes, they're just fighter airplanes, so they don't fly that ridiculously huge circle, but it still means more planes in the air. The Warspite had its long-range anti-aircraft buffed by 6 DPS. Woohoo! Now we've probably all read about the class-specific consumables, the speed boost and the sonar, which are both sort of meh and don't really change all that much about the game. But the one thing they failed to mention is that the smokescreen ability now only lasts 20 seconds instead of 60. Now this is a big deal. It means your destroyer's smokescreens are going to be a lot smaller, and it means that it's going to be much more difficult to run away from other players, because the gaps you're going to be able to bridge are going to be much smaller. Now lastly, if there was any doubt that this is the open beta patch, or at least the patch that is preparing us for open beta, module upgrades and ship research have increased in cost. Now I'm putting some examples on the screen so you can look at it for yourself, but basically module upgrade cost has increased about 3-fold, and ship research cost has about doubled. This is obviously not that big a deal on the test server because we all get 1,000,000 experience for our games, but it is going to be very significant on the live server. I mean, look at this, 198,000 experience to research the Izumo, and then another 143,000 to research all its modules? That is a lot of experience. I will say this though, it's not quite as bad as World of Tanks, and that is really all I wanted personally. But it does pretty much mean that open beta has to be somewhat around the corner, right? I mean, we're gonna get this patch on the closed beta server and probably test it for a while to see if, if there's any problems with the progression. But if they're going to test the progression this way, then that definitely means we're moving toward open beta. Personally, I think it's way too early. I think the balance is completely out of whack at the moment, and I think moving into open beta anytime soon would be insane. But we'll have to see how that turns out. There's no official word on it yet, but seeing these progression changes has me a little bit worried. If you enjoyed Decloaking the patch, please consider liking and subscribing. What is your opinion on the patch? Do you think the constant direct and indirect nerfs to destroyers are justified? Do you think battleships are actually in need of that much help? Or do you think the balance is really out of whack at the moment? Tell me about it in the comments and also leave your feedback. Next week we'll be talking about all the crazy changes that came to carriers and what I think about them, because it's going to be a little bit of a longer video. But until then, I've been Eldritch Master Donkey, and I'll see you in another video.